About a year ago, I decided to smoke weed for the first time after a long break due to multiple unpleasant trips. I thought that maybe now that I've given enough time, the experience will be great and I won't face any form of negative reaction. But, boy, was I wrong. 15 minutes after hitting the blunt, I went on such a familiar spiral, it felt as if I was experiencing the worst paranoia of all time. I started overthinking and feeding into one negative thought after another, and I wasn't able to stop. It was quite maddening. This experience was the main reason why I quit weed in the first place. It was, in a way, a huge mess, and all my friends got really worried. The next day, they were like, "Don't you ever smoke weed ever again." So naturally, I felt very embarrassed and ashamed because it seemed as though I was the only one going through this kind of experience, while everyone else in my circle appeared much saner and connected. Although I do know that multiple people experience the same kind of paranoia after the initial hit before the substance eventually calms them, I kept my mouth shut, thinking there must be something wrong with me. But I did end up Googling and diagnosing myself with a plethora of diseases. To give you more context, my relationship with cannabis was never like this. It started with a lot of fun in college, then I got dependent, which eventually led to a certain entanglement with the substance, controlling every aspect of my life. And the final incident where I had a mental breakdown despite taking a whole year long break was kind of a nail in the coffin. I took a vow never to smoke pot ever again. I mean, what happened? Cannabis was supposed to be a recreational drug that was meant to induce euphoria and regulate stress, right? I did experience that in the initial days, but what happened now? In hindsight, it was kind of a wake up call for me that I was completely wrong about weed. After months of diving into my favorite space, the internet, most of the research I found only amplified my biases, especially regarding the negative experiences with weed. So I decided to start going out and talking to a few people who use cannabis on a regular basis. Surprisingly, some of them shared similar experiences. Usually, in the first half an hour or so, they would experience a form of paranoia, and some of them would get mild reactions, while others were as intense as mine, so much so that they don't touch weed anymore. This got me really curious. Why does weed affect some people so severely while others seem to handle it just fine? Is there any underlying condition in certain individuals that makes them unable to process cannabis, or is it a fear of losing control? And what about the long term smokers who suddenly experience such severe negative reactions? We often love to debate and argue that alcohol has caused more deaths and disruptions than cannabis, but what about the rare cases where weed has a profound negative impact? Well, studies show that approximately 1 to 3 out of 10 people do develop cannabis use disorder, which is why we need to have an honest conversation about this. But first, before we start, what is weed? Well, cannabis, also known as pot, ganja, grass, or whatever you may call, is a psychoactive compound found in the plant Cannabis sativa. It contains THC, which is primarily responsible for the high people usually refer to while talking about cannabis. It also contains CBD, or cannabidiol, which is a psychoactive compound but does not produce any form of intoxication or euphoria. Instead, CBD is used for its potential therapeutic benefits such as reducing inflammation, alleviating pain, and easing conditions like nausea, migraines, seizures, and anxiety. Cannabis has been around for a very long time, way before it became a hot topic today. Its origins go all the way back to Central Asia or Western China. In fact, the earliest documented use of cannabis was in 2800 BCE, which is when it was listed in the pharmacopoeia of Emperor Shen Nung, who's considered the father of Chinese medicine. But it doesn't stop there. Cannabis is also mentioned in ancient texts from India, Assyria, Greece, and Rome. These texts say cannabis was used to treat all kinds of health issues like arthritis, depression, pain, asthma, and even things like lack of appetite. In India, during the Vedic period, cannabis was seen as a gift of happiness. They called it the joy giver or liberator, believing it helped people overcome their fears and anxiety. Well, it did not cure mine at all. Anyways, In Hindu tradition, they thought the healing powers of cannabis were a way to please the gods like Shiva. Cannabis has deep roots in India's history, and you'll find it embedded in their stories, culture, and religion. Now, cannabis has been used for different recreational purposes, and studies show that the plant we get nowadays has higher potency and as compared to the olden times, which does have its dangers as well as overconsumption, since smoking in general increases dopamine levels in your brain. Long term exposure to high levels of dopamine will directly impact your cognitive functions, lead to dependency, and cause adverse effects like anxiety, paranoia, and psychosis, especially for heavy users. Even long term exposure to THC may reduce gray matter volume in your prefrontal cortex, impairing executive functions like ability to plan, problem solve, and even organize. Weed does have its benefits like treating neurological problems, but when it comes to psychiatric problems, we might as well forget it. When I first tried Mary Jane, it was a blissful experience. My emotions were heightened and I felt joy and laughter. Weed was more than just a happy pill. It fueled my creativity and gave me like bursts of ideas. Everything felt euphoric, from philosophical explorations to feeling a sense of belonging with my friends. And at that time I felt, yeah, the hipsters were right. It felt like a drug that brought some sort of enlightenment and like some sort of antidote to my life's monotony. However, I built tolerance and started smoking daily, consuming cannabis after every meal. This led to a complete 180-degree change. Conversations turned to existential dread. My daily functions became slurred and I could not think clearly. I experienced anxiety from not smoking to extreme anxiety even while smoking. Paranoia, delusions, and the environment didn't help me at all. At that time, I believed I controlled my smoking, but everything crashed down with textbook symptoms and warning signs of cannabis induced psychosis. The first thing that gets affected is your sleep pattern. Back then, my research on weed was heavily biased. I would only look for articles highlighting its positive effects, especially on sleep. But ironically, the more I smoked, the worse my sleep became. My schedule was completely wrecked, and when I smoked, I barely slept. And when I didn't, I struggled a lot with insomnia. Another warning sign that you're slowly slipping into psychosis or any kind of mental health issue is the decline in your daily hygiene. My room became a complete mess. While I did manage to maintain basic hygiene and self care, there were times when I completely had let things go. I went from being someone who's obsessed with order to living in a space that is reflected in complete chaos. The next thing is paranoia and delusion. I was consumed by guilt and anxiety, convinced that everyone knew what I had done, that I had committed some unforgivable sin shaped by my upbringing. It was also during a time where spirituality on the internet was really booming. So I began experiencing a lot of delusions of grandeur alongside with overwhelming social anxiety. I started isolating myself completely, which is a sign of slipping into psychosis. I'd spend I'd spend days sitting at home, growing suspicious of every sound I would hear or conversation that is happening outside. I developed delusions that my friends were conspiring against me, plotting to destroy me, and whenever they visited, I swing into a manic state of high energy, extreme mood shifts, because deep down I was convinced that my delusions about them were real. Of course, this experience varies from person to person, but one thing that remains constant is how deeply personal this delusions of grandeur and paranoia feels. Another sign that you're slipping is hallucinations, and it's something I find difficult to talk about because I did have memory that haunt me, that still continue to haunt me till this day. But yes, I went through all major warning signs. Despite everything I was experiencing, I kept consuming high doses of cannabis every single day. And finally, there's falling behind in life. I became the exact stereotype people used to warn me about. When someone would ask, "Hey, how are you?" I'd respond with something as absurd as telling them that I had reached my full potential in discovering the truth of life. or something as crazy as having an awakening in that sense. In hindsight, that kind of talk was a clear indication that you have become detached from reality, and the people around you would really start expressing their concern about some noticeable changes in your behavior and mindset. That is often an early sign, whether of psychosis, addiction, or both. So, the conclusion, weed affects different for everybody, but if you feel you are starting to experience these kinds of symptoms of cannabis use disorder, I might suggest you to take a break or seek professional assistance. Friends can help you to a certain extent, but you are not alone. Anything in moderation is good, but excess will lead you down the rabbit hole that would be detrimental to your health. Anyways, this is me signing off. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thank you.